The morning air in Dawson County, Georgia, carried the scent of pine and red clay. It was March 2024, and Detective Sarah Mitchell stood in front of the old county courthouse, staring at a manila folder that had been collecting dust for nearly 70 years. Inside were photographs, witness statements, and a single question that had haunted 3 generations. What happened to Emily Rose Thornton? Sarah was 42. With sharp green eyes and graying brown hair she kept in a practical ponytail. She had grown up hearing whispers about the Thornton case. Her own grandmother had been Emily's classmate at Dawson High School. Every small town had its ghost stories, but this one was different. This one was real. Emily Rose Thornton disappeared on October 14, 1955. She was 17 years old, a senior at Dawson High, known for her bright smile and her dream of becoming a teacher. She left her house that Friday evening to attend a school dance at the gymnasium. She never arrived. Her body was found 3 days later in Sweetwater Creek, 5 miles outside of town. The coroner ruled it a drowning, but the bruises on her neck told a different story. The investigation went nowhere. In 1955, Dawson County was a place where certain families held power, where secrets were buried deeper than bodies, and where a black detective like Sarah would never have been allowed to wear a badge. But times had changed, even if slowly. Sarah had spent 15 years in law enforcement, the last 3 as lead detective in the cold case unit. She had reopened the Thornton file 6 months ago, driven by something she could not quite name. Justice, maybe, or stubbornness. Her phone buzzed. It was Marcus Chen, the forensic analyst from the State Crime Lab in Atlanta. Sarah, you need to sit down for this. She pressed the phone to her ear. What did you find? The DNA from under Emily Thornton's fingernails. We ran it through the genealogy database like you asked. We got a hit. Sarah's heart hammered. After 69 years, physical evidence had seemed like a long shot. But advances in forensic genealogy had been solving cold cases across the country. She had sent the samples to Marcus with little hope. Yet here she was, holding her breath. Who is it? Marcus paused. You are not going to believe this. The DNA belongs to a family line still living in Dawson County. We cross-referenced birth records, marriage certificates, military service documents. Sarah, the suspect is Walter James Cunningham. He was 21 in 1955. He is 90 years old now, and he still lives on Maple Street. Sarah felt the ground tilt beneath her feet. Walter Cunningham. Everyone in Dawson County knew that name. He was a pillar of the community, a deacon at First Baptist Church, a retired pharmacist who had run Cunningham Drug Store on Main Street for 40 years. He had coached Little League. He had served on the town council. He had donated the new wing at the public library. His great-grandchildren attended Dawson Elementary. Are you absolutely certain? Sarah asked. Marcus did not hesitate. The match is conclusive. Probability of 99.7%. Sarah, this is your guy. She ended the call and sat on the courthouse steps, the folder trembling in her hands. Around her, the town went about its morning. Old men drank coffee at Betty's Diner across the street. A young mother pushed a stroller past the gazebo in the square. Life moved forward, unaware that the past was about to come crashing back. Sarah opened the folder and pulled out a photograph of Emily Rose Thornton. Black and white, slightly faded. Emily stood in front of her family's house, wearing a Sunday dress, her hair styled in the soft curls popular in the 50s. She looked so young, so full of hope. I am going to get you justice, Sarah whispered. That afternoon, Sarah sat across from her captain, Robert Hayes, in his office at the Dawson County Sheriff's Department. Hayes was 58, a white man with a military crew cut and a face weathered by decades of Georgia sun. He had been a fair boss to Sarah, but she knew this case would test him. You want to arrest Walter Cunningham, Hayes said slowly, as if testing the words. The evidence is solid, Captain. DNA does not lie. Hayes rubbed his temples. Do you understand what you are asking me to do? Walter Cunningham is not just some old man. His family built half this town. His son is a state senator. His grandson runs the biggest real estate firm in the county. I know who he is. Then you know the firestorm this will cause. Sarah leaned forward. Captain, A 17-year-old girl was murdered. Her killer has lived free for 69 years. He has been treated like a hero while her family has been living with an open wound. This is not about politics. This is about justice. Hayes met her eyes. You are sure about the DNA? As sure as science allows. He nodded slowly. Then get the warrant. But Sarah, I need you to be ready. This town is going to tear itself apart. The warrant was signed by Judge Patricia Owens at 4 in the afternoon. By 5, Sarah and 3 other deputies were driving down Maple Street, a tree-lined avenue of old colonial homes with wide porches and manicured lawns. The Cunningham house sat at the end of the block, a white 2-story with green shutters and a garden bursting with azaleas. Sarah knocked on the door. Her pulse was steady. She had done this 100 times, but never like this. The door opened. Walter James Cunningham stood before her, leaning on a wooden cane. He was tall but stooped with age, his hair completely white, his face creased with deep lines. He wore khaki slacks and a cardigan sweater. He looked like everyone's grandfather. Detective Mitchell, he said pleasantly. To what do I owe the pleasure? Sarah held up the warrant. Walter James Cunningham, you are under arrest for the murder of Emily Rose Thornton. You have the right to remain silent. For a moment he simply stared at her. Then something flickered in his pale blue eyes. Not surprise, not fear, something colder. Recognition. I have been expecting you, he said quietly. The words sent a chill through Sarah. She cuffed him gently, more gently than he deserved, and led him to the patrol car. Neighbors had begun to emerge from their homes, drawn by the commotion. Phones were raised. Cameras clicked. By the time they reached the station, the news was already spreading. Walter Cunningham had been arrested for murder. The interrogation room was small and windowless, painted a dull beige. Sarah sat across from Walter, a digital recorder between them. His lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Diane Foster, sat beside him, her expression unreadable. My client has agreed to speak with you, Diane said, but I reserve the right to end this interview at any time. Understood, Sarah said. She turned to Walter. Let's start with October 14th, 1955. Do you remember that night? Walter folded his hands on the table. I remember every detail. Tell me. He took a breath. There was a dance at the high school. I was not a student anymore. I had graduated in 1952, but I still went to those things. Everyone did. It was a small town. Did you see Emily Thornton that night? Yes. Did you speak to her? Yes. What did you talk about? Walter's gaze drifted to the wall, as if he could see through it into the past. I told her she looked pretty. She smiled at me. We danced. And then what happened? He was silent for a long moment. Then he said, I offered to drive her home. She said yes. Sarah felt her chest tighten. Go on. We did not go straight home. I drove out to Sweetwater Creek. I told her I wanted to show her something. She trusted me. Everyone trusted me. Why did you kill her, Walter? He looked directly at Sarah for the first time. His eyes were hollow, because she said no. The silence in the interrogation room was suffocating. Sarah felt her hands clench beneath the table, her fingernails digging into her palms. Across from her, Walter Cunningham sat motionless, his confession hanging in the air like smoke. She said no, Sarah repeated slowly. No to what? Walter's jaw tightened. His lawyer, Diane Foster, placed a hand on his arm, but he shook his head. Let me finish. I have carried this for 69 years. Let me finish. I wanted her, he said, his voice flat and emotionless. I had wanted her for months. She was beautiful. Everyone thought so. But she was not interested in me. That night, by the creek, I tried to kiss her. She pushed me away. She said I was too old for her. She said she was going to tell people what I had done. So you killed her. I did not mean to. Walter's voice cracked slightly, the first sign of emotion. We argued. She tried to run. I grabbed her. We struggled. My hands were on her throat. I just wanted her to stop screaming. And then she was not breathing anymore. Sarah forced herself to remain professional, to keep her voice level. What did you do next? Panicked. I put her in the creek. I thought it would look like an accident. like she had slipped and drowned. Then I drove home, parked my car, and went to bed. The next morning I went to church. You went to church? Yes. I prayed for forgiveness. And then I went on with my life. Sarah stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. She needed air. She needed to not be in the same room as this man. She stepped outside, leaving Diane and Walter in the interrogation room, and leaned against the hallway wall. Captain Hayes approached her. How bad is it? Full confession. He admitted everything. Hayes exhaled slowly. Jesus Christ. There is more, Captain. Sarah looked at him. He has been living here all this time. He married, had children, grandchildren. He coached kids. He handed out candy at Halloween. And every single day he knew what he did. Hayes rubbed his face. The press is already outside. CNN, Fox, local stations. This is national news now. Sarah nodded. Emily Thornton deserves to be national news. She deserved it 69 years ago. By evening, Dawson County was in chaos. The arrest of Walter Cunningham had detonated like a bomb. News vans lined Main Street. Reporters stood in front of the courthouse, speaking into cameras with grave expressions. Social media erupted. Hashtags trended. Hashtag Justice for Emily. Hashtag Dawson County Murder. Hashtag Cold Case Solved. But the town itself was divided. At Betty's Diner, Sarah sat in a corner booth, trying to eat a sandwich she had no appetite for. Around her, she could hear the conversations. Some people were in shock. Others were angry, not at Walter but at her. I do not believe it, one woman said loudly. Walter Cunningham is a good man. This is a witch hunt. He confessed, someone else replied. They made him confess. That detective has had it out for him from the start. Sarah kept her head down, but she could feel their eyes on her. She had expected this. In small towns, legacy mattered more than truth. The Cunningham family had deep roots. Emily Thornton's family had left Dawson County decades ago, scattered across the country. Their grief too heavy to carry in a place that refused to give them answers. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from her grandmother. I am proud of you, baby girl. Emily can rest now. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. She quickly blinked them away. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the station to find a crowd gathered outside. Some held signs. Justice for Emily. Others held different signs. Free Walter Cunningham. Innocent until proven guilty. A man stepped forward as she approached. He was in his 60s, well-dressed, with the polished look of someone accustomed to power. Sarah recognized him from news reports. James Cunningham, Walter's son, the state senator. Detective Mitchell, he said, his voice smooth but cold. I would like a word. Senator Cunningham. Sarah stopped but did not extend her hand. You have made a terrible mistake. My father is 90 years old. He is confused. Whatever he said in that interrogation room cannot be trusted. He gave a full confession. The DNA evidence is conclusive. James stepped closer, lowering his voice. My family has done a lot for this town. We have influence, connections. If you pursue this, you will regret it. Sarah met his gaze without flinching. Is that a threat, Senator? It is a warning. You are destroying an innocent man's legacy over some misunderstanding from 70 years ago. Some misunderstanding. Sarah felt anger surge through her. A 17-year-old girl was murdered. Your father admitted he strangled her and dumped her body in a creek. That is not a misunderstanding. James's expression hardened. You are going to regret this. He turned and walked away, his entourage following. Sarah watched him go, her heart pounding. She had known this would be hard. She had not anticipated how personal it would become. Inside the station, Sarah found Captain Hayes in his office, staring at his computer screen with a grim expression. What is it? She asked. He turned the screen toward her. It was an email from the mayor's office. The subject line read, Reconsider the Cunningham case. Sarah scanned the message. It was carefully worded, full of phrases like community stability and potential legal complications, but the message was clear. The mayor wanted her to back off. They are trying to bury this, she said. Hayes nodded. The Cunninghams have donated millions to this town. The senator has pull at the state level. They are going to fight this with everything they have. Let them fight. We have the evidence. Hayes sighed. Sarah, I am on your side. But you need to understand what you are up against. This is not just about solving a case. This is about challenging power. And power does not go down easy. That night, Sarah could not sleep. She sat at her kitchen table, the Thornton case file spread out before her. She read through witness statements from 1955. Most were useless, vague recollections filtered through decades of fading memory. But one statement stood out. It was from a man named Thomas Reed, who had been a senior at Dawson High in 1955. He had told investigators that he saw Emily leave the dance with Walter Cunningham. But when pressed, he recanted, saying he must have been mistaken. The original detective had not followed up. Sarah pulled out her laptop and searched for Thomas Reed. He had died in 2003, but he had children. A daughter, Linda Reed Matheson, who still lived in Georgia. Sarah found her phone number and hesitated for only a moment before dialing. The phone rang 3 times before a woman answered. Hello? Mrs. Matheson. My name is Detective Sarah Mitchell with the Dawson County Sheriff's Department. I am investigating the murder of Emily Rose Thornton from 1955. I believe your father may have witnessed something important. There was a long pause. My father talked about that case until the day he died. Can you tell me what he said? Linda took a breath. He said he saw Emily get into Walter Cunningham's car that night. He told the police. But then men came to our house. Men in suits. They told my father that if he kept talking, bad things would happen to our family. My father was terrified. So he changed his story. Do you know who those men were? No. But my father always believed they worked for the Cunningham family. They had money. They had power. And they made sure no one would ever connect Walter to Emily's death. Sarah felt a cold rage settle over her. This was not just murder. It was a cover-up that had lasted for nearly 7 decades. Mrs. Matheson, would you be willing to give an official statement? Yes. Linda's voice was firm. My father lived with guilt for 50 years. He wanted the truth to come out. I will do it for him. The next day, Sarah presented Linda Matheson's statement to the district attorney, a sharp woman in her 50s named Rachel Diaz. Rachel read through it carefully, then looked up at Sarah. This changes everything. If the Cunningham family intimidated witnesses in 1955, that is obstruction of justice. It also shows premeditation to cover up the crime. Can we use it in court? Absolutely. Rachel leaned back in her chair. But Sarah, you need to be prepared. The Cunninghams are going to come at us with everything. Expensive lawyers, character witnesses, media spin. They will paint Walter as a confused old man. They will paint you as overzealous. They will try to make this about race, about outsiders attacking a beloved community figure. Let them try. Sarah's voice was steel. Emily Thornton was 17 years old. She had her whole life ahead of her. And Walter Cunningham took that from her. Then he lived a long, happy life while her family suffered. I do not care how old he is. I do not care how many buildings have his name on them. He is a murderer, and he is going to face justice. Rachel smiled slightly. Good, because this is going to be the fight of your career. The preliminary hearing was set for 2 weeks later. In that time, Dawson County transformed into a battleground. The national media descended like vultures, turning the quiet town into a spectacle. Camera crews camped outside the courthouse. Talk show hosts debated the case on cable news. Op-eds appeared in major newspapers, some calling for justice, others questioning whether a 90-year-old man should be prosecuted for a crime committed in his youth. Sarah became the face of the investigation, whether she wanted to be or not. Her photograph appeared in newspapers and on television screens across the country. Some called her a hero. Others called her something far worse. She received threatening emails and voicemails. Someone spray-painted traitor on her car. But she also received messages of support from people across the nation, from other cold case detectives, from families who had lost loved ones to unsolved crimes. One evening, her phone rang. It was a number she did not recognize, with a California area code. Detective Mitchell? A woman's voice said. Yes. Who is this? My name is Grace Thornton Williams. Emily Rose Thornton was my aunt. Sarah's breath caught. Mrs. Thornton Williams, I have been trying to reach your family. I know. We have been watching the news. Grace's voice trembled slightly. My mother was Emily's younger sister. She died 5 years ago. She never stopped hoping that someone would find out what happened. She never believed it was an accident. I am so sorry for your loss. Sarah felt the weight of those words. Your aunt deserved better. She deserved justice. Thank you. Grace paused. Detective, I want you to know something. My mother kept everything. Every newspaper article. Every police report she could get her hands on. And she kept Emily's diary. Sarah sat up straight. Emily kept a diary? Yes. My mother found it hidden in Emily's room after she disappeared. She gave it to the police in 1955, but they gave it back and said it was not relevant. Would you like to see it? Absolutely. I will send it to you overnight. Grace's voice grew stronger. Detective Mitchell, my family has waited 69 years for this. Please do not let them bury this again. I will not. Promise. The diary arrived the next morning in a small cardboard box. Sarah opened it carefully, as if handling something sacred. The diary was small, bound in faded pink leather, its pages yellowed with age. On the first page, in neat cursive, were the words, "This diary belongs to Emily Rose Thornton. Private. Keep out." Sarah began to read. The entries started in January 1955 and covered Emily's senior year. Most were typical teenage observations. Complaints about homework. Excitement about the upcoming spring formal. Worries about college applications. But as Sarah read deeper, a darker thread emerged. March 3, 1955. Walter Cunningham came into the library today while I was studying. He sat down next to me and started talking. He makes me uncomfortable. He is so much older and he looks at me in a way that makes my skin crawl. I tried to be polite, but I wish he would leave me alone. April 17, 1955. Walter was at church again. He always finds a way to stand near me. Today he asked if I wanted a ride home. I said no thank you, my father was picking me up. He seemed angry. I do not understand why he will not take the hint. May 22, 1955. I saw Walter at the drugstore. He gave me a free soda and said it was because I was special. I did not drink it. Something about him frightens me. I have not told anyone because everyone thinks he is such a nice man. But I know better. The entries continued through the summer and into fall. Emily's fear of Walter Cunningham grew with each page. She had tried to avoid him, but in a small town that was impossible. The final entry was dated October 13, 1955. One day before she died. Tomorrow is the school dance. I am excited but also nervous. I saw Walter this afternoon and he asked if I would save him a dance. I said I was going with friends and would be busy. He smiled but his eyes were cold. I have a bad feeling about tomorrow night. Maybe I will not go. But all my friends will be there and I do not want to miss it because of him. I wish I could talk to someone about this, but who would believe me? He is Walter Cunningham. Everyone loves him. Sarah closed the diary, her hands shaking. Emily had known. She had sensed the danger. And no one had protected her. Sarah brought the diary to Rachel Diaz immediately. The district attorney read through it with growing intensity, her expression darkening with each page. "This is devastating evidence," Rachel said. "It establishes a pattern of stalking and unwanted attention. It shows premeditation, and it proves Emily feared him. Can we use it in court?" "Absolutely. This diary is going to be the centerpiece of our case." Rachel looked at Sarah. Walter Cunningham is not going to be able to hide behind his reputation anymore. Emily is going to tell her own story. The preliminary hearing arrived on a cold Monday morning in early April. The courthouse was packed. Every seat in the gallery was filled. Reporters lined the back wall. Outside, protesters held signs on both sides of the steps. Walter Cunningham entered the courtroom flanked by his legal team, an army of lawyers in expensive suits. He walked slowly with his cane, playing the role of frail old man. But Sarah saw through it. She saw the calculation in his eyes. The judge, a stern woman named Margaret Holbrook, called the court to order. The Cunninghams had tried to get her removed, claiming bias, but she had refused to recuse herself. Rachel Diaz stood and addressed the court. Your Honor, the state will prove that on October 14, 1955, the defendant, Walter James Cunningham, murdered Emily Rose Thornton. We have DNA evidence placing the defendant at the scene. We have a full confession. And we have the victim's own words, written in her diary, documenting months of harassment and fear leading up to her death. The defense attorney, a silver-haired man named Richard Caldwell, rose smoothly. Your Honor, this case is a travesty. The defendant is 90 years old. The alleged crime occurred 69 years ago. The so-called confession was obtained under duress from a confused elderly man. And the diary is nothing more than the imaginings of a teenage girl. Sarah felt anger flare in her chest. The imaginings of a teenage girl. As if Emily's fear did not matter. As if her voice did not count. Judge Holbrook banged her gavel. I will hear the evidence and make my determination. Proceed. For the next 3 hours, Rachel presented the state's case. She called Marcus Chun to testify about the DNA evidence. She called Linda Matheson to describe her father's intimidation by the Cunningham family. And then she introduced Emily's diary. The courtroom fell silent as Rachel read selected entries aloud. Emily's words, preserved for 69 years, finally had an audience. Sarah watched the faces in the gallery. Some were moved to tears. Others looked uncomfortable. But no one could deny the truth in those pages. When Rachel finished, she turned to the judge. Your Honor, Emily Rose Thornton could not speak for herself in 1955. But she can speak now. And she is telling us exactly what happened. Walter Cunningham stalked her. He harassed her. And when she refused him, he killed her. Judge Holbrook nodded slowly. The defense may present its case. Richard Caldwell stood and called his first witness. James Cunningham, the senator, took the stand. Senator Cunningham, how would you describe your father? James looked directly at the jury. My father is the kindest, most generous man I have ever known. He has spent his entire life serving this community. The idea that he could harm anyone is absurd. Rachel cross-examined swiftly. Senator, were you alive in 1955? No. I was born in 1960. So you have no personal knowledge of what your father did or did not do that night. James hesitated. No, but I know my father. You know the man he became after he murdered Emily Thornton. You do not know who he was before. Objection, Caldwell shouted. Sustained, Judge Holbrook said. But the point was made. The defense called character witnesses one after another. People who praised Walter's community service. His charity work. His kindness. But Rachel dismantled each one with the same question. Were you there on October 14, 1955? None of them were. Finally, Walter himself took the stand. It was a risky move, but the defense clearly hoped his age and frailty would earn sympathy. Mr. Cunningham, Richard Caldwell began. Did you kill Emily Rose Thornton? Walter looked at the courtroom, his voice weak. I do not remember. I am 90 years old. My memory is not what it was. But in your interrogation with Detective Mitchell, you confessed to the murder. I was confused, frightened. They pressured me. Sarah leaned forward. This was a lie. She had the recording. She had his words. Rachel stood for cross-examination. Mr. Cunningham, you told Detective Mitchell, and I quote, I have been expecting you. Do you remember saying that? Walter said nothing. You also said, I remember every detail. You described exactly how you killed Emily Thornton. You said she said no, and that is why you strangled her. Were you confused then? Walter's composure cracked slightly. You have lived a long, comfortable life, Rachel continued. You got married, had children, built a business, served on the town council, all while Emily Thornton was in the ground. Does that seem fair to you? Walter's hands trembled on the cane. I prayed for forgiveness. You prayed, but you never turned yourself in. You never told the truth. You let her family suffer for 69 years. That is not remorse, Mr. Cunningham. That is cowardice. Objection, Caldwell roared. Withdrawn. Rachel returned to her seat. Judge Holbrook called a recess. Sarah stepped outside the courtroom and found herself surrounded by reporters shouting questions. She pushed through them and found a quiet corner in the courthouse lobby. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Grace Thornton Williams. I am watching the live stream. Thank you for fighting for Emily. My mother would be so grateful. Sarah felt emotion swell in her chest. She typed back quickly. Emily is fighting for herself. I am just making sure people listen. If you are still rooting for justice after everything you have heard, take a moment and subscribe to this channel. Emily's story deserves to be told. And this is just the beginning of the truth coming to light. Judge Holbrook returned to the bench after the recess, her expression unreadable. The courtroom fell into a tense silence as everyone waited for her decision on whether the case would proceed to trial. After reviewing all the evidence presented today, Judge Holbrook began, her voice clear and firm. I find that the state has established probable cause. The DNA evidence is scientifically sound. The defendant's confession, recorded and documented, is compelling. And the victim's diary provides crucial context that cannot be ignored. This case will proceed to trial. The courtroom erupted. Some people cheered. Others gasped in disbelief. Walter Cunningham sat motionless, his face pale. James Cunningham stormed out of the courtroom, his phone already pressed to his ear. Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. This was not victory, not yet. But it was progress. Emily Thornton would have her day in court. The weeks leading up to the trial were brutal. The Cunningham family unleashed their full arsenal. They hired a public relations firm that flooded social media with messages portraying Walter as a victim of overzealous prosecution. They funded a website called Justice for Walter that collected donations for his legal defense. They orchestrated interviews on friendly news programs where family members tearfully defended his character. But Rachel Diaz and her team worked just as hard. They tracked down additional witnesses from 1955, people who had been teenagers then and were now in their 80s. A woman named Dorothy Palmer came forward and testified that Walter had made her uncomfortable at a church picnic in 1954, touching her shoulder too long, standing too close. Another man, Eugene Foster, admitted he had seen Walter's car parked near Sweetwater Creek on the night of October 14, 1955, but had been too afraid to tell anyone because the Cunninghams controlled the town. Sarah spent her days interviewing witnesses and her nights reviewing evidence. She barely slept. Her apartment became a war room, walls covered with timelines and photographs. Her captain, Hayes, warned her about burnout, but she could not stop. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Emily's face from that photograph. Young, hopeful, gone. One evening, Sarah received an unexpected visitor. An elderly woman appeared at the police station, asking specifically for her. Her name was Margaret Louise Simmons, and she was 87 years old. Detective Mitchell, Margaret said, her voice soft but steady. I need to tell you something I should have said 69 years ago. Sarah led her to a private room. Please go ahead. Margaret clasped her hands in her lap. I was at that dance in 1955. I was a sophomore. I saw Emily leave with Walter Cunningham. But I also saw something else. Earlier that evening, I saw Walter talking to Emily near the gymnasium doors. She was shaking her head, backing away from him. He grabbed her wrist. I saw her pull away and run back inside. She looked scared. Why did you not tell the police? Margaret's eyes filled with tears. Because I was 15 years old and terrified. My father worked at the lumber mill. The Cunninghams owned it. If I said anything, my father would lose his job. My whole family would suffer. So I stayed quiet. I have lived with that guilt every day since. Sarah reached across the table and took Margaret's hand. You are telling the truth now. That is what matters. I saw on the news that the trial is starting next week. I want to testify. I am old. I do not have much time left. But before I die, I want to do the right thing. Thank you, Mrs. Simmons. Your testimony could change everything. The trial began on a humid morning in late May. The courthouse was surrounded by security. Metal detectors had been installed at every entrance. The jury had been selected after weeks of careful vetting. 7 women, 5 men, a mix of races and backgrounds, all residents of Georgia but none from Dawson County. Rachel Diaz delivered her opening statement with quiet intensity. She told Emily's story from beginning to end, painting a picture of a young woman with dreams and plans, whose life was stolen by a man who thought his power and privilege meant he could take whatever he wanted. Emily Rose Thornton was 17 years old, Rachel said, standing before the jury. She wanted to be a teacher. She loved poetry and music. She was planning to apply to college. She had her whole life ahead of her. And Walter Cunningham took all of that away because she said no, because she dared to reject him. And then, for 69 years, he lived freely while her family suffered. But today, finally, Emily gets her voice back. Richard Caldwell, the defense attorney, took a different approach. He portrayed Walter as a product of his time, a young man who made a terrible mistake in a moment of passion, and who had spent his entire life making amends through service to his community. What happened to Emily Thornton was a tragedy, Caldwell said. But my client has lived an exemplary life for nearly 7 decades. He has helped countless people. He has given back to this community in every way possible. At 90 years old, he is not the same person he was at 21. Punishing him now serves no purpose except revenge. Sarah watched from the gallery, her jaw clenched. It was a calculated strategy. Make the jury see Walter as a grandfather figure, not a murderer. Make them question whether justice delayed was justice denied. The prosecution's case unfolded over 10 days. Marcus Chun testified about the DNA evidence, explaining in clear terms how the genetic material under Emily's fingernails matched Walter Cunningham's family line with near certainty. The defense tried to poke holes in the science, suggesting contamination or lab error, but Marcus held firm. Linda Matheson testified about her father's intimidation by the Cunningham family. Eugene Foster described seeing Walter's car near the creek. Dorothy Palmer shared her own uncomfortable encounter with Walter years before Emily's murder. And then came Margaret Simmons. She walked slowly to the witness stand, leaning on a walker. But once she sat down and began to speak, her voice was strong. I saw Walter Cunningham grab Emily Thornton's wrist that night, Margaret said. I saw the fear in her eyes. I was a child then, and I was too afraid to speak up. But I am not afraid anymore. That man killed her. And everyone in this town knew something was wrong. But we all stayed silent because the Cunninghams had power. Well, they do not have power over me anymore. The defense tried to discredit her, suggesting her memory was unreliable after so many years. But Margaret did not waver. I remember it like it was yesterday, she said firmly. Some things you never forget. Some guilt never goes away. On the 15th day of the trial, Rachel played the recording of Walter's confession. The courtroom was silent as his voice filled the space. I wanted her. She said no. I grabbed her. My hands were on her throat. And then she was not breathing anymore. Sarah watched the jury's faces. Some looked horrified. Others were visibly emotional. One woman wiped tears from her eyes. When the recording ended, Rachel stood. Those are the defendant's own words. Not coerced. Not confused. The truth. He killed Emily Rose Thornton because she rejected him. And he has hidden behind his reputation and his family's power for 69 years. The defense called their witnesses. Character witnesses who spoke of Walter's kindness and generosity. His pastor testified that Walter had been a devoted member of the church for decades. His son, James, took the stand again, pleading for mercy for his father. But when Walter himself took the stand for the second time, everything changed. Rachel approached him slowly. Mr. Cunningham, you have heard the evidence against you. The DNA, the witnesses, your own confession. Do you still deny that you killed Emily Thornton? Walter was silent for a long moment. Then he said, I do not deny it. The courtroom exploded. Judge Holbrook banged her gavel repeatedly. Order. Order in this court. Richard Caldwell looked stricken. His entire defense strategy had just collapsed. Rachel pressed forward. So you admit you killed her? Walter's voice was barely a whisper. Yes. And you have lived with that knowledge for 69 years? Yes. Why did you not turn yourself in? Walter finally looked up, his eyes meeting Rachel's. Because I was a coward. Because I thought I could get away with it. And I did. For 69 years, I got away with murder. The jury sat in stunned silence. Do you have anything to say to Emily's family? Walter turned toward the gallery, where Grace Thornton Williams sat in the front row. I am sorry. I know that means nothing now. But I am sorry. Grace stood up, her voice shaking with emotion. Sorry does not bring her back. Sorry does not give my mother her sister. Sorry does not erase 69 years of pain. You do not get to ask for forgiveness now. Judge Holbrook banged her gavel. Mrs. Thornton Williams, please sit down. Grace sat, tears streaming down her face. Sarah felt her own eyes burning. The closing arguments were brief. Rachel reminded the jury that justice delayed was still justice. Richard Caldwell made a final plea for mercy based on Walter's age and his decades of community service. But the jury deliberated for only 4 hours. When they returned, the foreperson, a middle-aged black woman named Patricia Johnson, stood and read the verdict. We, the jury, find the defendant, Walter James Cunningham, guilty of murder in the first degree. The courtroom erupted again. Some people sobbed. Others shouted. Walter Cunningham sat motionless, his face expressionless. Sarah felt something break open inside her chest. Relief, grief, vindication, all of it at once. Grace Thornton Williams turned to Sarah and mouthed 2 words. Thank you. Outside the courthouse, Sarah stood on the steps as reporters surrounded her. Cameras flashed. Microphones were thrust toward her face. Detective Mitchell, how do you feel about the verdict? Sarah took a breath. I feel like Emily Rose Thornton finally got the justice she deserved. This case proves that it is never too late for the truth. It is never too late to hold people accountable, no matter how powerful they are. What do you want people to take away from this case? Sarah looked directly into the cameras. I want people to know that every victim matters. Every voice matters. Emily Thornton mattered, and she will never be forgotten. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks after the verdict. In that time, Dawson County began the slow, painful process of reckoning with its past. The guilty verdict had sent shockwaves far beyond Georgia. National news outlets ran feature stories about how a small town had protected a murderer for nearly 7 decades. Academic papers were written about systemic corruption and the abuse of power in rural America. Documentary filmmakers reached out to Sarah, asking to tell the story. But for Sarah, the work was not finished. She spent those 3 weeks digging deeper into the Cunningham family's influence in 1955. What she found was worse than she had imagined. The original sheriff who investigated Emily's death, a man named Donald Pritchard, had received a large sum of money from the Cunningham family just weeks after closing the case. Bank records showed a deposit of $5,000, an enormous amount in 1955, with no legitimate source. Pritchard had retired early and moved to Florida, where he died in 1982. The medical examiner who ruled Emily's death a drowning, despite obvious signs of strangulation, had been the Cunningham family physician. He had also received payments. The witnesses who had been intimidated into silence had all worked for Cunningham-owned businesses or depended on Cunningham money in some way. It was not just a murder. It was a conspiracy that had touched every level of Dawson County's power structure. Rachel Diaz brought all of this new evidence to the sentencing hearing. Your Honor, this was not simply a crime of passion. This was a calculated cover-up that corrupted law enforcement, intimidated witnesses, and denied justice to the Thornton family for 69 years. The Cunningham family used their wealth and influence to buy silence. They turned an entire town into accomplices. Judge Holbrook listened grimly. The evidence you have presented is deeply troubling. It suggests systemic corruption that went far beyond the defendant himself. Richard Caldwell rose to speak. Your Honor, my client is 90 years old. He has severe health issues. He requires daily medication and assistance with basic tasks. Sending him to prison at his age is effectively a death sentence. I ask the court to consider house arrest or supervised release. Rachel stood immediately. Your Honor, Emily Rose Thornton was 17 years old when the defendant strangled her and threw her body in a creek. She never got to turn 18. She never went to college. She never fell in love, never had children, never grew old. The defendant has lived a full life. He does not deserve mercy. Judge Holbrook nodded slowly. I will hear from the victim's family before I render my decision. Grace Thornton Williams approached the podium. She carried a photograph of Emily, the same one Sarah had looked at so many times. She placed it on the podium so the judge could see it. Your Honor, Grace began, her voice steady despite her tears. This is my Aunt Emily. I never met her. She died 15 years before I was born. But she has been part of my life every single day because her absence shaped my family. My grandmother cried for her daughter until the day she died. My mother spent her whole life wondering what happened to her big sister. Family gatherings were always shadowed by grief. We had a hole in our family that could never be filled. Grace paused, composing herself. When I was a little girl, my mother told me stories about Emily. How she loved to read. How she wanted to be a teacher. How she was kind to everyone. My mother said Emily was the best person she ever knew. And then she would cry because Emily never got to become the woman she was meant to be. Grace looked directly at Walter Cunningham. You took that from us. You took Emily. And then you went on to have everything she should have had. Career. Family. Grandchildren. Respect. You got to be old. You do not deserve any more mercy than you showed my aunt when she begged you to stop. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of people weeping. My family has waited 69 years for justice, Grace continued. We have waited through birthdays and holidays and graduations, always with an empty chair where Emily should have been. Do not make us wait any longer. Give us the justice we deserve. Give Emily the justice she deserves. Grace returned to her seat, her hands shaking. Sarah reached over and squeezed her hand. Judge Holbrook called a brief recess. When she returned, her expression was resolute. I have presided over many difficult cases in my career, but this one will stay with me for the rest of my life. The evidence presented in this trial paints a picture of a young woman who was failed by everyone who should have protected her. Failed by the man who killed her. Failed by the justice system that let her killer walk free. Failed by a community that chose silence over truth. She looked directly at Walter Cunningham. Mr. Cunningham, you have been found guilty of murder in the first degree. The jury heard your confession. They heard the testimony of witnesses. They saw the evidence. And they reached the only conclusion that the facts supported. You killed Emily Rose Thornton. You strangled her. You disposed of her body. And then you used your family's wealth and power to escape justice. The defense has asked for leniency based on your age and health. But I cannot ignore the fact that you have lived 90 years, while your victim lived only 17. You have had a lifetime that you stole from her. You have had opportunities she never got. And most damning of all, you have shown no genuine remorse until you were caught. Judge Holbrook paused, letting her words sink in. Therefore, I sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. You will spend whatever time you have left behind bars, as you should have done 69 years ago. The courtroom erupted once again. Walter Cunningham closed his eyes. His family sobbed. Grace Thornton Williams collapsed into Sarah's arms, crying with relief. Walter Cunningham was transported to a maximum security prison in central Georgia that same afternoon. Due to his age and health conditions, he was placed in the medical unit. He would spend his remaining days in a cell, surrounded by guards and barbed wire, far from the comfortable life he had built on the foundation of Emily's death. James Cunningham held a press conference the next day, his face haggard. My family is devastated by this verdict. We believe a grave injustice has been done. We are exploring all legal options for appeal. But the appeals would go nowhere. The evidence was too strong, the confession too clear, the DNA too definitive. Within weeks, the Cunningham family's empire began to crumble. The state launched investigations into the corruption that had protected Walter in 1955. The Cunningham drug store, which had been closed for years, was revealed to have been used to launder bribe money. Properties were seized. Bank accounts were frozen. James Cunningham resigned from the state Senate amid mounting scandals. The name that had once commanded respect in Dawson County now carried only shame. Sarah stood in the cemetery on a warm June afternoon, looking down at Emily Rose Thornton's grave. The original headstone was simple, just her name and dates. But Grace Thornton Williams had commissioned a new marker, a beautiful granite stone with an engraving of an open book and the words, "Beloved daughter, sister, friend." Her voice was silenced, but never forgotten. Justice at last. Grace stood beside Sarah, along with several other members of the Thornton family who had traveled from across the country for this moment. "Thank you," Grace said softly, "for not giving up, for seeing Emily as more than just a cold case, for seeing her as a person who mattered." Sarah shook her head. "I did my job, but Emily did the hard part. She left us her diary. She told us exactly what happened. All I did was make sure people listened." "That is everything," Grace said. "For 69 years, no one listened. You changed that." They stood in silence for a while, the warm breeze rustling the trees around them. Other families visited nearby graves. Children played in the distance. Life continued as it always did. Sarah thought about all the cold cases still waiting to be solved. All the voices still waiting to be heard. All the families still waiting for justice. Emily's case had shown that it was never too late. That truth could survive even decades of lies and corruption. That justice, however delayed, was still worth fighting for. Back at the police station, Sarah found her desk covered with letters. They came from all over the country, from families of missing persons, from survivors of violence, from young women who saw themselves in Emily's story, from old men and women who had carried secrets for decades and were finally ready to speak. One letter stood out. It was from a woman in Tennessee named Barbara Wright. She wrote that in 1962, when she was 16 years old, she had been assaulted by a prominent businessman in her town. She had never told anyone because she knew she would not be believed. But after watching Sarah's case unfold, she wanted to report it. The man was still alive, still respected in his community, still free. "I know it has been a long time," Barbara wrote, "but maybe it is not too late. Maybe there is still hope for justice." Sarah picked up her phone and dialed the number at the bottom of the letter. "Mrs. Wright, this is Detective Sarah Mitchell. I received your letter, and I want you to know that it is never too late. Tell me your story. Let me help you." That evening, Sarah drove to her grandmother's house. The old woman was in her garden, tending to her tomatoes. She looked up as Sarah approached and smiled. "You did it, baby girl. You got justice for Emily." Sarah sat down on the porch steps, suddenly exhausted. It does not feel like enough. She is still gone. 69 years are still lost. Her family still suffered all that time. Her grandmother sat beside her and took her hand. "You are right. Nothing can bring Emily back. Nothing can erase what that family went through. But what you did matters. You told the truth. You refused to let power win over justice. You gave Emily her voice back. That is not nothing. That is everything." Sarah leaned her head on her grandmother's shoulder. "I keep thinking about all the other cases, all the other Emilys who never got justice. Then you keep fighting. One case at a time. One voice at a time. You cannot save everyone. But you can save someone. And that someone matters." Later that night, Sarah sat at her kitchen table with the Thornton case file finally closed in front of her. She had spent months living and breathing this case. Now it was finished. The killer was convicted. The truth was known. Justice, however imperfect and delayed, had been served. But as she looked at the stack of new letters on her table, she knew the work was far from over. Emily's case had opened a door. It had shown that even the oldest wounds could heal. Even the deepest lies could be uncovered. Even the most powerful people could be held accountable. Sarah picked up the next file on her desk. A missing person case from 1978. A young man named Marcus Thompson who had disappeared without a trace. The investigation had gone cold within weeks. But Sarah knew that somewhere there was evidence. Somewhere there was truth. Somewhere there was a family still waiting. She opened the file and began to read. The work continued. 3 years later, the morning sun filtered through the windows of the Dawson County Cold Case Unit. a newly established apartment housed in a renovated building on the edge of town. Sarah Mitchell stood in front of a wall covered with photographs, timelines, and case files. What had started as a one-woman mission had grown into a team of 6 detectives, 2 forensic analysts, and a victim advocate coordinator. Sarah was now 45, with more gray in her hair and deeper lines around her eyes. But there was something else different about her, something that had not been there 3 years ago. Peace. Not the peace of someone who had forgotten the darkness, but the peace of someone who had learned to carry it with purpose. The Emily Rose Thornton case had changed everything. Not just for Sarah, not just for Dawson County, but for cold case investigations across the country. The case had become a blueprint for how to use modern forensic technology, genealogy databases, and persistent detective work to solve decades-old crimes. Sarah had been invited to speak at law enforcement conferences from California to New York. She had trained hundreds of detectives. She had helped establish cold case units in a dozen other counties. But more than the professional accolades, the case had given hope to families who had waited years, sometimes generations, for answers. Detective Mitchell, a voice called from the doorway. Sarah turned to see her newest team member, a young detective named Marcus Chin Jr., son of the forensic analyst who had cracked the Thornton case. Got a minute? Always. What do you have? Marcus held up a file. Remember the Thompson case from 1978? The missing college student? Sarah nodded. She had been working that case on and off for 2 years. Marcus Thompson had vanished from his dorm room at the University of Georgia, leaving behind his wallet, his keys, and no clues. His family had never stopped searching. We got a hit on the DNA we pulled from his jacket. Marcus Jr. said, his voice excited. Genealogy match. We have a suspect. Sarah felt the familiar surge of adrenaline mixed with solemnity. After 46 years, another family might finally get answers. Let me see it. That afternoon, Sarah drove to Atlanta to meet with Marcus Thompson's sister, Patricia Thompson Davis. Patricia was now 70 years old, a retired schoolteacher with kind eyes and hands that trembled slightly as she held the photograph of her brother. You really think you found him? Patricia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. We found the person responsible for his disappearance. Sarah chose her words carefully. We are still working to locate Marcus's remains, but we have strong evidence about what happened. Patricia closed her eyes, tears streaming down her cheeks. 46 years. I have waited 46 years. My mother died 10 years ago, never knowing what happened to her son. My father died 20 years ago with the same burden. I am the only one left who remembers Marcus as more than just a missing person case. Sarah reached across the table and took Patricia's hand. He was your brother. He was loved. And we are going to make sure everyone knows the truth about what happened to him. Thank you, Patricia whispered. Thank you for not forgetting him. As Sarah drove back to Dawson County, she thought about all the families like Patricia's. All the people who had spent decades in limbo, not knowing if their loved ones were alive or dead, what had happened to them, whether anyone cared enough to keep looking. The Emily Thornton case had taught her that time did not erase the need for justice. If anything, time made it more urgent, because every year that passed was another year a family spent in pain, another year a killer walked free, another year the truth stayed buried. That evening, Sarah attended a community event at the Dawson County Library. The library had established the Emily Rose Thornton Memorial Scholarship, a full scholarship for young women pursuing teaching degrees. Grace Thornton Williams had endowed it with funds from a book she had written about her aunt's life and the fight for justice. The book, titled Silence No More, The Emily Thornton Story, had become a bestseller, bringing Emily's voice to millions of readers. Tonight was the scholarship award ceremony. 5 young women would receive funding for their education, a chance Emily never got. Sarah sat in the audience as Grace took the podium. She had aged gracefully over the past 3 years, her grief transformed into purpose. 3 years ago, Grace began, my family finally got the justice we had waited 69 years to receive. But justice alone could not bring Emily back, could not erase the decades of pain. So we asked ourselves, how do we honor Emily's memory? How do we turn this tragedy into something meaningful? She gestured to the 5 scholarship recipients sitting in the front row. Emily wanted to be a teacher. She wanted to shape young minds, to make a difference in her community. These 5 young women will do what Emily never could. They will walk into classrooms and inspire students. They will carry Emily's dream forward. And in that way, Emily will finally become the teacher she always wanted to be. The audience applauded. Sarah found herself wiping away tears. This was what justice looked like beyond a courtroom. This was how a community healed. After the ceremony, one of the scholarship recipients approached Sarah. She was a young black woman named Jasmine Cooper, a junior at the University of Georgia studying elementary education. "Detective Mitchell," Jasmine said shyly, "I just wanted to thank you, not just for the scholarship, but for showing me that the truth matters, that justice matters. I am studying to be a teacher, but after seeing your work on the Thornton case, I am thinking about law enforcement too. Maybe I can do both, teach and protect." Sarah smiled. The world needs people who do both, people who educate and people who seek truth. Whatever path you choose, do it with integrity. "I will," Jasmine promised. "Because of Emily. Because of you." 2 months later, Sarah received news that Walter James Cunningham had died in prison. He was 93 years old. He had served 3 years of his life sentence, a fraction of the time Emily Thornton had been denied. Sarah did not attend his funeral. Neither did most of Dawson County. The Cunningham family held a small, private service. James Cunningham had moved to South Carolina, trying to escape the shame that now clung to the family name. The Cunningham mansion on Maple Street had been sold and converted into a community center. The family's legacy of wealth and power had crumbled, replaced by a legacy of corruption and murder. But Sarah did visit Emily's grave that day. She brought fresh flowers and stood quietly, thinking about the girl who had been so full of promise, whose life had been cut short by violence and privilege. "He is gone now," Sarah said softly to the headstone. "He can never hurt anyone else. And your story has helped so many others find justice. You did not die in vain, Emily. You changed the world." The breeze rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of magnolia blossoms. Somewhere in the distance, children laughed in a playground. Life continued as it always did. But Emily was not forgotten. 1 year after Cunningham's death, Sarah was invited to speak at a national conference on cold case investigations in Washington, D.C. She stood before an audience of 500 law enforcement professionals from across the country and told Emily's story. "The Emily Rose Thornton case taught me several crucial lessons," Sarah said, her voice carrying through the auditorium. "First, that physical evidence can survive for decades if properly preserved. Second, that new technology can crack cases that seemed impossible just years ago. Third, that witness intimidation and corruption can suppress the truth for generations, but never permanently. And fourth, that every victim deserves justice, no matter how much time has passed." She clicked to the next slide, showing photographs of other cases her unit had solved over the past 4 years. Marcus Thompson, missing since 1978, found murdered by a fraternity brother over a drug deal gone wrong. Jennifer Walsh, who disappeared in 1985, killed by her boyfriend who later became a prominent lawyer. David Chun, a gay man murdered in a hate crime in 1991, his case ignored by detectives who did not consider his life worth investigating. Each of these people mattered, Sarah continued. Each had families who loved them. Each deserved justice. And each case proves that it is never too late to seek the truth. The audience gave her a standing ovation. Afterward, dozens of detectives approached her with their own cold cases, asking for advice, asking for help, asking for hope. Sarah gave them what she could, because that was what Emily's legacy had become. Not just one solved case, but a movement, a refusal to let time bury the truth, a commitment to every victim, every family, every voice that had been silenced. 5 years after the trial, Sarah stood in the cold case unit surrounded by her team. On the wall was a new section, Solved Cases. 15 photographs with names, dates, and brief summaries. 15 families who had finally received answers. 15 killers who had been held accountable. But on another wall was an even larger section. Unsolved cases. 43 photographs. 43 families still waiting.